Welcome back. I am so excited that you have joined me again in the Aligned Womb, Aligned You podcast. I'm Kate Nagai, and I am your host and womb guide on this journey. I'm here to help you to lean into the language of your menstrual cycle so that you can align yourself and awaken and activate to your womb wisdom to live the most inspired life. I am so excited to jump into this episode and to dive into today's topic. So let's get started. So this week, I wanted to dive into a conversation that really impacted me my last cycle, and I'm kind of preparing for in the coming days. We're talking all about ovulation overwhelm. I know this might seem kind of silly because we've been told that ovulation is this like fun time in our cycle where we have all this energy, but the downside to it, or the flip side or the shadow side of it, is that this can be a really overwhelming time in our cycle. And last cycle, I definitely felt this. I almost felt like this was a second menstruation in so many ways, where everything felt so incredibly amped up, creating more stress in my body, and really left me feeling exhausted midday most days. Now, this isn't something that I experience every cycle, but it's definitely a pattern that I went through last year and that I'm going through again right now. And it's really interesting. And I think this is the beauty of charting our cycle, is that we get glimpses of awareness. We have this tool or this resource to really get to know ourselves. But what I've noticed is that my state of overwhelm and ovulation really becomes a real live experience in the springtime, the environmental spring. So every year in spring, somewhere in that May, April-ish area, I go through this stint where ovulation is not enjoyable. It actually is something that causes me a lot of distress, or I don't want to say distress. I just feel very overwhelmed and I feel really exhausted and run down. And I remember the first time that I experienced this, I was talking with a cycle coach and I was like, I just don't get it. Like, I feel like I'm having another menstruation. Like, I'm in that inner winter phase again where I just feel completely tired all day, every day. And when she brought this concept to my awareness of just why I might be feeling overwhelmed, and that overwhelm can be a byproduct of having a really perhaps strong ovulation or just being really consumed in that high energy of all those hormones, how this can happen. And so I've been watching it over the years, and like clockwork, every springtime, I get into this exhausted, overwhelmed, stressed out state during my ovulation week. So I really wanted to share this with you because it popped up in my awareness last month, and right now I'm on day 10. And so I'm preparing in about 3 days that I might be in this experience again. So I'm coaching myself through how to prepare for it. And I thought, what a beautiful conversation to bring to the pod and to open up a conversation that maybe we haven't thought of, or maybe we've been confused by. Maybe we've been told that our summertime, like our inner summertime, our ovulation is a time where we're playful and we're connecting with everybody and we're magnetizing and people are just attracted to us and we want to have sex and all these things, when in fact, we feel the complete opposite. And so this might be a little bit of insight as to why. So let's just wind back a little bit here. Our ovulation phase, our inner summer phase, this phase can feel like we are arriving into our unique self. It can be a really comfortable phase to be in when we're in the flow of all those heightened hormones in our body. And we can really feel charged and excited and feel like we have a lot of juice in the tank. So generally, during this season or during this time in our cycle, we are at our peak energy. It's when we have a lot of confidence. We have this great capacity to want to achieve and to impress and to strive for success, to manifest things, to really jump on our goals that we've maybe set for ourselves. So we can have a lot of confidence here. We can really feel like we are a superwoman in many ways. And when we are in, I don't know if I want to say a healthy space, but in the space where we can really honor and can really be with this energy, it can feel like we're just riding the wave, that we're just like on the trip of all trips, and that everything feels possible, and that we are extremely excited by the energy, and that we feel like we can do anything, like we're really that superhero person. But here's what happens is that in the height of this energy, sometimes when it can be all consuming in our body, we can overcommit. We can really begin to overschedule ourselves. We can become less connected to ourselves in such a way that we actually start to lose connection with ourselves, because we start to be everything to everyone, and we are striving to meet other people's expectations, and we lose sight of who we are. And if we're on the fertility journey, ovulation is not a fun time in our cycle. This is where we get heightened stress because we're in a time capsule of trying to accomplish a task that feels like it's out of our control and puts a lot of pressure on us. So as much as all these hormones are here, this really is a time where we can feel like we are everything to everyone else. We feel like, without even really being cognitive of it, sometimes we set ourselves up to being overwhelmed because we've said yes to so many things, or we look at our to-do list. I am a prime candidate for this. When I am setting my schedule for ovulation, I'm like, why did I put that I'm going to accomplish 6 things in one day? I know that's humanly impossible with 3 young kids, right? And so this is where that reality check comes in, is like, oh yeah, we can do all these things. And we've booked all these things in this week because we know it's 1 week in our cycle that we have this energy, but then we overcommit ourselves, and it cannot, it can bring us down and make us feel like we are really worthless. And it actually kind of feeds into what we may experience in that inner fall of that inner critic. Like we're almost feeding the inner critic before we actually get into the home of the inner critic, which is in our inner fall. So why does this happen in our ovulation? Well, like I've kind of already said, we're at this peak energy. So we just say yes. We say yes to everything. But it's also because we can be more sensitive to stress and emotional stress at this time in our cycle. And this isn't because of a hormonal imbalance. This is just that there's a lot pumping in us. Like it's almost like being at a rave and you weren't expecting to have the energy or the music pumping that hard. I've never been to a rave. I don't even know if that's a good example, but that's what in my head it kind of feels like, is that you're in this space where there's just so much energy and everyone is so excited, and there's just noise everywhere. It's like sensory overload. And if we haven't prepped ourselves for it, it can create that stress response. So our hormones are like really amping up here in a way that if we haven't tended to ourselves, perhaps in our menstruation, or perhaps we haven't moved slowly through our inner spring, like slowly walked up that mountain to our ovulation, then this can be a time where it can just feel like things happen too fast, too quickly. And some of the feelings that can come up, or the 3 common things that we might start to experience if we are in ovulation overwhelm is, 1, the most obvious, being that we can go into overwhelm. The second is that we can go into a place of really extreme or just really walking the wire of self-doubt a lot of the time. And then the third would be that we perhaps, if we're in a place where it's all really overwhelming, we might start to play small, that we might have a little bit of imposter syndrome that's really sparking up here, because there's a part of us internally that really wants to give it their all, but deep inside of us, there's a part of us that's doubting ourselves. It's that inner critic that's kind of popping through earlier than it should. So let's talk about these 3 a little bit more in depth. These 3 overwhelming feelings that can come out of having a really heightened ovulation that we're not prepared for. So the first one, like I mentioned, and it's kind of the theme of this whole talk, is overwhelm, because that's what I mainly feel during ovulation is the pathway of overwhelm. So overwhelm really is us being in high energy from our hormones and really feeling like this high energy is fueling more confusion in the body. It really creates this sense and this urgency that we have to do it all. We can also, in this state of overwhelm, start too many things at once. This is my Achilles heel. I put way too much on of that I'm going to accomplish all these things, and we forget, or I forget, that there is a season to do, and that ovulation is not the season to complete things. So sometimes that can play on my self-confidence as well. And sometimes we can just feel really dizzy because there's just a lot happening. If you're somebody who has historically maybe moved through some trauma or have a really dysregulated nervous system, all this energy can really make that nervous system feel even more heightened to make you feel overwhelmed. And a byproduct of overwhelm is sometimes feeling completely exhausted. The opposite of like doing is resting. And so when the energy is really high and it's creating that overwhelm experience, it may make us feel completely tired and completely run down. But then we've created this list of things that we have to do, and it's really hard for us to be able to pause, to rest, to give ourselves permission, because it's like, well, I have this 1 week, or I have these few days that I've got to get this all done, depending on how much we're trying to cycle sync our life with our hormones. Now, the second thing that comes up for us, or the second challenge, let's call it, is self-doubt. So having this high amount of energy can sometimes create this experience inside of us that creates expectation. We have set expectations on ourselves that we should be able to accomplish things, that we should be able to navigate things, that we can be everything to everyone. And those expectations can add more fuel into the inner critic, which will really amp up a lot in our next phase of our luteal phase in our inner fall. So it's really important that we need to tend to our energy, like make sure that we're like not pushing the boundaries too much as we come out of our bleed days, that we're really nourishing ourselves. So that way we have the bandwidth to be able to negotiate. Let's call it negotiate with our inner critic. Another big thing that sometimes happens with this heightened energy of hormones in the arena of self-doubt is that we compare ourselves with everyone. I once heard it called comparisonitis, and I thought that was hilarious because it happens almost every ovulation where I go on Instagram or I start comparing myself to other people that are in my field, or looking at my friends, or if we are trying to conceive, we might be comparing ourselves to every one of our friends that are pregnant right now. We really feed this comparisonitis in our body, which can make us feel low, not high during our ovulation. And also knowing that with self-doubt, it's because we are actually energetically moving further away from ourselves. We're not staying close. We're not tending to our heart. We're not authentically being our unique self. We are trying to fit ourselves into a pigeonhole that's somebody else. And then the third challenge that we face is the playing small challenge. Sometimes when we get these big feelings and we want to do it all, it just takes one pebble, one stone for us to feel like we're not worthy enough, or that we in ourselves are some way defected, right? And so let's go back to the fertility journey. This might be, well, like thinking every cycle, I haven't gotten pregnant, so it's not going to happen this time. So we start to fear the possibility. If you're not trying to conceive, this can really come through in ovulation, in the fear of being visible. Like if we are uncomfortable in our own skin through most of our cycle, and we haven't been nurturing that part of ourselves, so really starting to get into that third chakra, that power center of our self-esteem, there can be this overwhelming fear of that we want to express ourselves. We want to let the world know who we are, but then there's so much doubt and fear of that visibility. And I call this the imposter syndrome. I think it took me a while to really be able to identify, but I have strong imposter syndrome. And this comes up so often of like, am I smart enough? Do I need to take another course? Who am I to charge that much? Like all these questions come into your field because you self-doubt who you are and what you have to offer the world versus really honoring your unique self. So knowing this, what do we do? What are our steps? How do we combat these three challenges? How do we combat this overwhelm or this confusion in the body when energy is high? It can be such a beautiful part of our cycle if we've done the care and the nurturing and the resting that we need so that we can fully come into it prepared. You know, as I'm talking right now, the best analogy that comes to my mind is postpartum, right? Where, we push throughout our whole pregnancy, we work up to the very last day until baby's born, and we haven't taken that third trimester to really rest enough that when all of a sudden baby's here and all of a sudden we have to be up all night and we're on demand to somebody else, it can feel very overwhelming because we haven't cared for ourselves for this time in our life where we're being asked to give more to the world, right? And so the way we nurture ourselves to prepare ourselves so that we don't feel this overwhelm, so we don't feel this fear of visibility, so we don't have self-doubt is through these, I'm going to call them my personal 4 tactics of how I combat ovulation overwhelm. So my first one is to make sure that I'm resting in my menstruation. The first step is that you have to do the prep work before ovulation. We have to care for ourselves when we're in the season or the part of our cycle that's asking us to rest, to accumulate, to, allow ourselves to be, so that when we get into the phase of doing, which is at ovulation, it's the complete opposite of menstruation. So menstruation, we're slow, we're resting. The state of doing is the complete opposite at ovulation, where we're expressing, we're living without fear, we are in our fullness, we are pushing boundaries. And the only way we can do that is if we have prepared the body for that. So the work starts at menstruation. When we care for ourselves during our menstruation, we give the body the power and the acceptance to slowly move through our follicular phase, our inner spring phase. So that way we can slowly build up the momentum, allow the momentum to build in the system so that when we come into that ovulation, we're ready for it. We're rested. We have the confidence. The body, the mind, the spirit, the soul, the emotions are all prepared for what's about to come. So moving slow is really important there. And then the beautiful thing to know is that when we nurture our menstruation so that way we have the capacity to deal with the high energy of ovulation, is that we give the body the opportunity to have a really strong ovulation. And if the body has a really strong ovulation, that's going to translate into us having a really healthy menstruation where the body is detoxing and cleansing and everything in the system is working. Remember, our menstrual cycle is our 5th vital sign. So we need to nurture those 2 major pivotal moments, menstruation and ovulation, in order to have a healthy cycle all season or all cycle. So first step is to rest in your menstruation so that you have the potency to be able to navigate the inner demands that your body's going to want during ovulation. But then to add another layer onto that, I would also say we need to rest during ovulation. If you're feeling so overwhelmed that you need to rest, a quick power nap or a quick yoga nidra or a quick nervous system regulation tool
can really help balance that energy and bring you back into a place where you can navigate the heightenedness of ovulation. So know that rest, if your body needs it, needs it. No superhero goes all day. So take those opportunities or take those moments knowing that you really are going to balance out those other areas of your system, your other areas of your body. So I always say the 5 bodies. You have your physical, your emotional, your mental, your energetic, and your spiritual, right? And so this is us tending to all of those bodies. The second tool that I recommend to combat the overwhelm is plan for playtime. Your body, your ovulation is begging you just to play. It's like the kid out in the park that just wants to go on the swings, but you're sitting at the sidewalk, right? And so make sure that in the season, if you're feeling overwhelmed, that you're scheduling in time to just be playful, to do something that nourishes you, that really brings joy back into your body. Because if you're allowing your body to express that joy, to express that fun, and to have these moments of playfulness, to break the rules that maybe society has set for us, that is how we are going to help foster and disperse that built up energy of ovulation. And remember, when I say like going against maybe what society expects, is that like if we look at the work life, so many of us go into the job and we do the exact same thing 9 to 5, right? We just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Our ovulation might need a little bit more of something for us. So if we allow a little bit more playfulness, a little bit more, office connection of just talking with our coworkers, laughing, joking, if we're dispersing our energy in these joyful ways, we'll have the capacity and the energy to catch up on what we may have perhaps, slacked off in our inner fall phase. Inner fall phase is the phase to do. So this, I guess, kind of plays into the same, to add into this a little bit more, is just remembering that you have a season for play, a season for connecting. This is ovulation. And our season to complete tasks and to do is our inner fall. And I think it's beautiful that it lines up, that it comes directly after our season of play. It's like we've had all this fun. Now we got to wind down, sit down, and tend to the tasks that we didn't complete. The third thing that I would recommend is express pleasure. Find ways for you to tap into your pleasure states. Pleasure states can be a lot of things to a lot of different people. It is really tapping into our senses, all 5 of our senses. So this is through taste. Can you really enjoy food here, right? Can you maybe explore different kinds of food, or can you really go and splurge and get the food that you really enjoy? Splurge there. This might be a physical sensation. This might be actual sex or sexual expression. I think as women, we've been taught that we're not allowed to be sexual creatures, or not, we shouldn't be outward with it. This should be behind closed doors. And there can be something so beautiful about us tending to our body and feeling safe to have desires and to want things and to feel safe to express that. And so, our sensuality and our sexuality, they're 2 different things, but both of them need to be tended to in ovulation. It's our body's way of saying, I want to experience life to its fullest. So really tap into your pleasure states. And then the last one I would say is trust your magnetism. This is the part of our cycle where our body really wants the world to know who we are, right? This is the time in your cycle for you to express your uniqueness, what it is that makes you you, rather than shying away from it or feeling like it's unacceptable or that we have to meet a certain image that we've been raised to show up as. This is the time in our cycle where we get to say, this is who I am and who I want to be. Our body and our hormones are really asking us to get clarity on what makes you you. And can you start to tell the world who you really are? Not just the one that you've been told is who you should be, right? And I'm not saying like go bold or like sometimes it's the simplest things that we've been told during our childhood or even during our teens of how we should act or how we should behave or how we should conform. But sometimes we need to step out of that conformity and really express who we are uniquely, because the thing is people are seeking uniqueness. People are looking for people to connect with that brings them together. That's not just all of us being the same robotic person, right? And so this is the time in our cycle where your vibrancy is not only going to be received well, but people will be excited to see it because you'll have the charisma, you'll have the confidence, you'll have the belief that this is okay. And sometimes with that uniqueness, it can get really scary. So once again, coming back to those nervous system tools. And if you're like, what nervous system tools? Go check out the episodes that I have on the podcast. There's 3 of them. There's 2 from Colleen Jorgensen where we talk about nervous system regulation. And there's another one from Jenny as well. That was just a few weeks ago where we talk about nervous system regulation. But, the simple tasks to be able to feel safe in our own body. And maybe as you're playing with this ovulation overwhelm and you're playing with this idea of how to trust your magnetism, maybe you just do it with your safe people. Maybe you do it with just your friends, or maybe you just allow yourself in your own 4 walls of your home to be authentically you and be okay with that. But the whole purpose of this conversation today is to say, if you're one of those people that is like, ovulation does not feel great for me, it doesn't feel like this vibrant time, maybe this might be why. And so explore why am I feeling low during ovulation? What am I feeling first of all? And then what do those feelings feel like? And is it maybe stemming from one of these things that we discussed here today? And then the other part that I would say with it as well is track your cycle so that you can start to see, if this overwhelm that you're feeling is happening during ovulation, because then we know it's an ovulation overwhelm issue, but also to start tracking so that you can see how other cycles might be interfering. Like for me, I've noticed that it's the environmental seasons that affect my ovulation, meaning that in the spring, when the whole world is getting excited here in Canada for summertime, because we get very short summers, that my body starts to go into a big to-do list and I become very overwhelmed in my ovulation in the environmental springtime. So there might be a correlation. There might be a correlation with the moon cycle with you. You might feel a correlation with the environmental seasons like myself. You might notice that there is a unique time that it happens in your cycle. And the thing is that once we know it, we can prepare for it, we can plan for it, and it makes everything so much easier. I've said this once, I've said it twice, and I'll keep saying it for the rest of my life. Women are not unpredictable. We are very predictable. So once you get to know your cycle in this way of curiosity and of really trying to get to know you for only you, you really will see all the patterns come to light, and it will make you feel like you can really live life fully with curiosity and with inspiration, because it's about knowing you. It's like having a private manual for how you operate. And you'll notice that when things feel off, it may be because it's a common rhythm that happens in your cycle. Like I said, maybe throughout the year, maybe it's just a one-time thing. But then when things really are off in your body, it's because you've noticed the rhythm and noticed that this is actually completely off. And then that gives us permission to go explore deeper, of maybe going to our physicians or our practitioners that we're working with and saying, okay, this is uncharacteristic of my cycle, and this isn't something that is just like a delayed cycle within a cycle, kind of like how I have this experience in the spring, environmental spring. We get to know ourselves enough that we can then know when we have to ask for help and know when maybe our body needs a little bit of aid or assistance so it can come back into a balanced state. So, ovulation overwhelm. If you have it, you're not alone. You're just like me. And I hope that this really helps. So that way you feel a little bit more peace when you feel overwhelmed during this season. And so that you give yourself permission to play with these tools and see if any of them help to kind of bring you back into a balanced state in your cycle.
Are you excited about aligning to your cycle? If so, make sure that you subscribe to this podcast and like the episode if it really resonated with you. Until next time, remember, womb wisdom equals connection to self, which ultimately equals inspired living.